everybody. I'm Roberto Barrella from the Chair of Energy and Poverty, and today I will present our study on the impact of energy refurbishment strategies on the domestic energy services affordability. In particular, we will see the Spanish case and we will introduce some policy implications. So, this research in particular presents a bottom-up methodology to assess the impact of different energy refurbishment strategies on Spanish household thermal energy expenditure. And the results obtained made it possible to evaluate the difference between the 2020 outline, so the current scenario, and various future scenarios referred to 2030 and point out some policy implications and some future research work. So the Energy Performance of Building Directive established the whole EU countries must adopt long-term renovation strategies to support the refurbishment of the national building stock. In particular, in 2020, the Spanish government published the National Strategy for Energy Renovation in the Building Sector, which sets a reduction target in the residential sector consumption of 15.3% by 2030. And of this 15.3%, the majority of the reduction correspond to thermal uses. So the question is, what is actually the impact of different strategies of energy refurbishment on the future affordability of domestic energy services? So characterizing in Spain, we see as the population is around 14 million of people, and according to the last statistics, we have between 6.6 and 16.7% of the population that is in energy poverty. And look at the map, we can see they have different winter climate zones. There are 6 winter climate zones, and they're very different climate in winter between the coast and Canary Island, that is very warm climate, and the center of the peninsula, or the middle. So the national strategy against energy poverty defined the required thermal energy expenditure of an household as the theoretical expenditure required to ensure the indoor thermal comfort, so heating and cooling, and also to provide a necessitated level of domestic hot water. So before starting with the characterization of energy expenditure, we have to look at the residential sector, and we can see the building stock is very old, because we have 55% of the buildings in the residential sector that are built before the basic standard of construction, and the 95% of that have an APC, so an energy performance certificate, have a very low rate, D or lower. And the thermal systems also are very old. For the heating, the 49% of them are low efficiency boilers. For domestic hot water is 54%. And for the cooling, we can see as only 30% of households actually own air conditioning systems. So we see as the residential building stocks needs an energy refurbishment. And in order to evaluate that, we calculate the required thermal energy expenditure with a bottom-up model. So we started for the heating and cooling from the specific reference demand of a household, a typical household in each locality. And on the other hand, for the domestic hot water, we calculate the daily specific hot water consumption, and then we extrapolated that to arrive at a provincial analysis. So we calculate the required demand for each province from a weighted average, and then finally we calculate the required expenditure of heating and cooling and domestic hot water, and summing up all these, we calculate the required thermal energy expenditures. And in this process, the most important parameters are the climate zones and the dwelling energy efficiency rate. So we point out some reference scenarios. In particular, we selected the 2020 as the reference scenario, and as future scenario, the 2030, but we analyzed three different scenarios. The zero is the secular stagnation, so no retrofitting measures. The first scenario is the low-cost building retrofit scenario, and the second one is the thermal systems replacement scenarios. So the first one is the reference scenario for 2020. You can see as the 81% of actually our thermal energy expenditure in the theoretical point of view is dedicated to heating, and on the other hand, we have that just the 10% is the cooling and 9% domestic hot water, and with a total of 993 euros, and we have to say that fixed costs are included all in the heating calculation. So looking at the future, in 2030, we will be negligible changes in the theoretical demand for heating and cooling and for the domestic hot water. But on the other hand, for the energy prices, we will have an estimation of 43.3% of increase of the fossil fuels prices. And this will affect actually the 2030 secular stagnation scenario. We will see an increase of the expenditure for heating and domestic hot water and an overall increase of 22%. But if we apply a low-cost building retrofit to the older building, they are the 55% of the building, we can see as we have a 30% of decrease in heating and cooling 34%, but we have no effect in domestic hot water. So with an investment cost of 5,500 euros, we arrive to a minus 25% in required thermal energy expenditure. So if we apply the second scenario with a thermal system replacement, so replacement of whole thermal system from heating to cooling systems, we have a 10% reduction in heating expenditure and 37% in cooling. And we have a little effect in domestic hot water, but we still have an increase. With an investment that is 1/3 of the latter scenario, we have a 10% of reduction in required thermal energy expenditure. So comparing these three scenarios, with secular stagnation, we have an overall 22% of increase of required thermal energy expenditure. Applying a low-cost building retrofit, we reduce this expenditure by 25%. And on the other hand, if we apply the replacement of thermal systems, we reduce this expenditure of 10%. So the Spanish residential sector urgently needs some energy refurbishment. And we saw also for 2030 that the increase in fossil fuel prices can reduce or offset the positive effect of some measures. So we need one of the solutions will be the electrification of heating and domestic hot water services, in particular in the 2050 scenario. Also, the low-cost building retrofit is the most effective measures, but also is the most expensive one. Is 3 times the other measure, the thermal system replacement. So we have to prioritize vulnerable households. Also, the variable included in this analysis may change in the future in many different ways. So we have to carry out a sensitivity and climate change analysis. And on the other hand, we can see as the energy consumption can change depending on the occupant behavior and some socio-economical parameters. So we have to analyze some consumption patterns, but also the situation energy poverty. And at the end, we will look also on in the future on the improvement of household appliances and by an analysis of the electricity expenditure. Thank you very much.